Episode 122, Jonbenet case, more about the ransom note. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the ransom note again. And since we're going to look at it with a fresh look and maybe focusing on something a little different than I have, at least in the past, looked at it as, I will be repeating a lot of the same kind of talking points that have been mentioned before. Stuff like, the $118,000. Why such a low amount? Stuff like that has already been talked about over and over. But again, this is going to be a fresh look at the note, and so a lot of things will be repeated. So, the first thing that I notice about the ransom note is that it's well written, in the sense it seems like an educated person wrote the ransom note, and it's a good ransom note. Sounds legit. It explains, getting the money, how we're going to contact you, what you should do. If you don't do this, we'll kill her. It's well written. The problem is, it's like they kidnapped the president's daughter or something. Like, reality, people don't write a ransom note like this. And it's like a movie ransom note. And I know everybody goes bananas about, it's like Speed or Ransom or all these movies or Dirty Harry. I don't mean it like that. I mean it's like written like a script, what a ransom note should look like. And again, it's like it's some extremely important person has been kidnapped, not like an ordinary person, and not like an ordinary ransom note. An ordinary ransom note would be something like, we got your daughter, we won $1 million, we'll call, and that would be it. So what this implies is two things. One, if it's John or Patsy, that they have this giant ego, that they're really important people. And that's why they're saying, they've written this elaborate ransom note. They think like other people think they're some very important person. And that's why this ransom note has this feel of being, this is very serious ransom. Or, I guess if you go in this direction too, that it's like the FBI or some CIA operation that did this ransom. Or some serious, or maybe a foreign faction. But what it doesn't look like is some housekeeper or sexual pervert or some guy down the street. It's just so far removed from that possibility. The next thing I'd like to point out is the small foreign faction. This does kind of imply like the generalization of a Southerner or an American who's scared of some foreign faction or has some kind of bias that they don't like foreigners, or there's kind of a prejudice against foreigners, or crimes like this are committed by foreigners. Whoever wrote this note, if they're not a foreign faction member, then they're pointing the finger at a foreign faction. And you've seen this in other high-profile cases. Somebody pointing the finger at somebody other than themselves, and kind of in a prejudiced manner. And I think that could be the case here also. So the next thing, looking at this ransom note, that sticks out is the $118,000, and what a small amount that is. And I'm going to talk about that in the next piece. Then it mentions that to break down the 100,000 into $100 bills, and then the 18,000 into $20 bills. And then it has the sentence that has the most significance to me. It says, make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. Well, there's a lot of information right there. First, they seem to know that that's a lot of bills. And I think a lot of people don't realize how many bills that is. That's 1,900 bills. And so that's a great deal of space. So the question is, why would John or Patsy write that in a phony ransom note? It just seems way too clever or too detailed to put into a phony ransom note. The only explanation that I can come up with is John wrote the ransom note and he needed an excuse to take the suitcase out of the house because he was planning to put Jonbenet's dead body in the suitcase, and he needed a reason why he was taking the suitcase. And so he had to explain to Patsy that he needed a suitcase. And I believe that's why that's in there. And it doesn't make sense for Patsy to write that in the ransom note. I believe a lot of people see that word attaché and they think Patsy wrote the ransom note. It's a word that Patsy would use. But I think John could write that word also, even though I don't know why he would use that word. And it also points to the fact, to me, eliminating the housekeeper or some crazed intruder or something. Why they would use the word attaché, I don't know. The ransom amount of $118,000 goes against the professional look of the ransom note. It's complete opposite of what it should be. You have this fancy, nice, educated, written ransom note, but it asks for $118,000, a small amount of money, not like $5 million. Again, I think John Ramsey wrote the ransom note, or phony ransom note, and the reason he picked $118,000 is it had meaning to him, and it was an amount that he could raise. I was kind of surprised that he had to call someone to get an advance on his credit card to pay the ransom. You would think with somebody making so much money as he was, that he would have that in a stock account or in a savings account or something. And he obviously didn't have that amount of money. The next thing in this ransom note that's so obvious to me that I don't understand how people get thrown off by this is the being called between 8 and 10 a.m. the next morning and being arrested. I don't understand how anyone can think that the call was supposed to be on December 26th, that morning when they found the ransom note. To me, it's as clear as day that the call is going to be the next day. Because how do you get to the bank before the call? The ransom note's telling you, get this money and have the money, and then we'll call. And so the bank's not going to open until 9 or 10 o'clock or something like that. So I think John wrote this ransom note. And I think he was surprised that people thought that the call would be that morning, because it can't come that morning. And that's also why it says to be rested, is because they were going to be, in his mind, they were going to be nervous and worried. And so his phony ransomer wants him to get a good night's sleep, which he was planning on having a good night's sleep. And then the next day, the ransom person would call between 8 and 10. The next thing that I want to point out is that the writer of this ransom note is an educated person. Now, there's some people out there listening to me that are just not going to accept what I'm saying. But I'm going to say it anyway, and I think a lot of people will understand. But the words hence, deviation, particularly, provoke, tampered, familiar, tactics are not ordinary common words, and they're not used often, especially all on one page of a ransom note. What this does is eliminate so many people. So many people are incapable of writing this ransom note. And I'll give you an example. The policeman who writes his report about this incident, I don't think he could write this ransom note. He wouldn't be using words like hence, deviation, tampered, provoke, particularly. The last page of the ransom note has several things that stick out. First, the John, that it's personal, and kind of the change in the tone of the ransom note. And that does make it look a little bit like Patsy wrote it. And then you have, use that good Southern common sense of yours. Well, John was not from the South. He's from Michigan. And so a couple things there. Either Patsy or John, who wrote this, knew that that wasn't correct. So it's kind of weird that that's put in there. I mean, obviously it could be to try to throw people off, making them think, well, I didn't write this, that's why that's in there. Or Patsy wrote it, that's why it's in there. But it's still kind of odd. I believe the closing of the ransom note, the victory, SBTC, is kind of like something out of the late 1960s, early 70s. And I think it kind of dates the author of this note. Like, I don't think a younger writer would put something like that or think of that. That's not something 1996 where people, some kind of terrorist organization, the SLA or something like that. It just, to me, it dates the author. The final thing that I want to point out about the ransom note is its length. I don't think a lot of people appreciate how long it is or the motivation it would take to write it. I think maybe if they sat down and wrote out the whole thing in one sitting, they might appreciate what effort it took to write this. And what that tells me is, if either John or Patsy killed Jonbenet, they would have the motivation to write this lengthy ransom note, because they wouldn't want to go to jail for life, and they don't want their friends to think they murdered their daughter. So they would be highly motivated to write this ransom note. And I believe they're the only people that would have that kind of motivation to write this. And to me, that's clear. but other people don't see that. So anyway, that's my observations about this ransom note. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and on the next episode, we're going to examine the Jonbenet Ramsey case some more, and we're going to look into John Fernie and why he was there so early in the morning, so quickly. So I'll see you the next time.